The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. A fragile ceasefire deal between Iran and Israel will have all the market reaction as stocks rally and the oil price falls. Amazon to invest £40 billion in the UK with more warehouses and thousands of new jobs. Plus a blow for low-income households as supermarket inflation hits its highest level in more than a year. Very good morning. Welcome to Business Live on this Tuesday with me, Darren McCaffrey. Well, the markets have been reacting this morning to the news of that ceasefire between Israel and Iran. And despite the fragility of that truce, stocks have rallied and the price of oil has fallen. Iran has denied this morning that it's violated the ceasefire with a missile attack on southern Israel, but Israel has vowed to retaliate. Well, let's have a look at how the markets are doing. As you can see, they're all in positive territory in Asia, which has closed after a bit of a rally overnight. Those gains continued in Europe today. Again, the main indices at the moment all up more than 1% there. The DAX actually up nearly 2%. Here in the UK, the FTSE is currently trading up a fraction, up 0.24%. Meanwhile, let's look at the currencies. Sterling making quite a lot of ground against the US dollar in recent days. It had fallen back, but it's now up to 136, up more than 0.5%. It's also up more than 0.5% against the euro at 117, and the euro's up against the dollar at 116. And the all-important oil price, as I say, it has been fallen. In fact, it's fallen quite a lot over the last 12 hours or so, and it is currently down nearly 3% at just below $70 a barrel for Brent crude. Well, let's bring in Lucy Coates, there I am, the investment director at JM Fin. Lucy, very good morning to you. Let's just start with the markets if we can. As I say, they've been pretty actually steady, haven't they, in recent days, given the tension, very much a wait-and-see game. But they do feel that things have calmed down somewhat this morning, despite the fragility that we're seeing between Israel and Iran.
Yes, good morning, Darren. It was really strange. On Sunday evening, late, I made the fatal mistake of reading an analyst's note, which forecast a 10 to 20% downside if Iran, in response, were to close the Strait of Hormuz. And so I didn't sleep too soundly. But yesterday, oil was steady, equity markets were steady, a very muted reaction. And really, it sort of underlined the fact that sort of risk management, which is effectively what I do, is that sometimes what is likely to happen sometimes just doesn't. And so, again, today, we're not seeing any great celebration of the news that we've got a ceasefire, although I hear the latest news that might have changed. But, yeah, markets are taking it all in their stride.
And is that, frankly, Lucy, because we just have got a lot more used to uncertainty, that, things have ebbed and flowed quite a lot, not just in the Middle East, it must be said elsewhere, and that the markets do have to take these things in the stride, or else we'd just be on this continuing roller coaster ride?
You're exactly right. So, there are outstanding questions. They remain in geopolitics worldwide. And actually, over the last 6 months, it's been pretty tough news for markets, whether it's Liberation Day or whatever, and they've had to sort of take it in their stride. But really, investors are focusing now on the sort of medium-term outlook for equities, sort of the economic growth, inflation, fiscal policy, central bank policy rates, and corporate earnings. And those on the sort of 6 to 18-month timescale look fairly positive. So I think while the oil price is sort of steady, I think it's fine for markets, and that's really why we're seeing a sort of fairly flat line.
And one of the things, and we particularly focus on oil, don't we, given, as you've rightly pointed out, the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, but we're also in a very different world than the one that we were in 20, 30 years ago, or certainly the 1970s, when we were almost entirely reliant on Middle Eastern oil. That's no longer the case, and that does mitigate, in many ways, the volatility around this.
It does, and I think oil's not going to go higher than the market can handle. Oil demand is actually on the low side. The US is pretty self-sufficient, and the oil supply is on the high side. So it was really a zero-sum game if Iran were to close the Strait of Hormuz, because it would only upset the Chinese, where most of their oil exports go. And there are other sort of worse effects in terms of maybe dragging the US into war. So I think it's not a good time to look at the oil price in the sense of it being a weak spot, because it certainly isn't. And it's a different world from when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Well, yeah, and isn't also the point that when it comes down to it, what's happening here is difficult and it's challenging and in many ways quite horrific, what we're seeing play out in different parts of the Middle East. But in the end, it feels much more like a regional conflict than, for example, the more global big challenges around Russia, Ukraine, and indeed, of course, Donald Trump's tariffs, which in many ways could have a more profound impact on the global economy.
Yeah, I mean, the tariffs, we saw the reaction on Liberation Day and the tariffs, and that was much more, the markets really didn't like that. But I think what we're learning from Donald Trump is that his base is actually to avoid significant conflict. And while I sort of took a deep breath when I heard the news on Sunday, and then I saw the analyst note, it's quite fearful. But actually, if you take a step back and you just sort of say, well, actually, Trump generally leans against the US getting more involved. And there's no point in just worrying about events until it really gets worse.
OK, Lucy Coote, really appreciate your time this morning from JM Finn. I think we're going to go now to the House of Commons. We're listening into Foreign Office questions. The Foreign Office Minister, Hamish Faulkner, is answering on behalf of the government. Let's have a listen in to what's been said in Parliament.
Will the Minister please raise this with his Israeli counterpart? Minister.
I can confirm to my honourable friend that I have raised these issues with my Israeli counterpart. It is appalling that hundreds of healthcare workers have reportedly been killed since the start of the conflict. We continue to urge the Israeli authorities to ensure that incidents are investigated transparently and that those responsible are held to account and lessons learned. Healthcare workers, premises and facilities must be protected, allowing medical staff to do their work.
First.
More than 450 Palestinians have been killed in recent weeks when Israeli forces opened fire on those attempting to collect aid from GHF. The people of Gaza not only face daily risks from bombs and bullets, but the ever-present danger of man-made drought and famine. Will the government commit to using all resources at its disposal, including further sanctions and arms embargo, to ensure that aid is delivered to Gaza under the auspices of the UN and other suitably qualified bodies?
Minister.
The killing of civilians at aid distribution centres in Gaza is horrifying. Israel must fulfil its obligations under international law to ensure unhindered humanitarian assistance. I won't speculate about future sanctions or arms embargoes, but we do continue to engage with our partners and will not hesitate to further action if the government of Israel does not change course.
Paula Kirk-Smith.
Speaker, Musa Abu Darabi is just one of hundreds of Palestinians who have been killed trying to access food from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in recent weeks. 15 international human rights organisations have now warned that the GHF may face legal consequences for aiding and abetting or otherwise being complicit in crimes under international law, including war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide. Will the Minister join me in condemning the murder of desperate and starving people, and what assessment does he make of the GHF's legality?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no one should risk death or injury to feed their family. And as I said in this House on the 4th of June, Israel's aid delivery measures are inhumane. We will not support any mechanism that endangers civilians. And we've continuously called on Israel, including most recently on Sunday, to immediately allow the UN and aid partners to safely deliver all types of aid at scale.
Desmond Swain.
On 3 occasions, the Minister, in answering this question, has said Israel must. What will he do if Israel doesn't?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman knows, this government has taken a series of actions in response to developments in Gaza. We will continue to take such actions until the situation changes.
Alexis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the government's assessment of how effectively medical aid can be delivered to those in need in Gaza, including the remaining Israeli hostages?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, aid can be delivered effectively into Gaza. There is an established mechanism through the United Nations and its partners. We want to see those mechanisms in place, but the Honourable Gentleman raises the vital question of ensuring that the hostages themselves get sufficient access to food. Both my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, and I have heard directly from Eli Sharabi, a released hostage, who talks about the deprivation of food from hostages by Hamas. That must stop, and they must immediately release all hostages.
We're a Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, my Bath constituents have watched in horror as Israeli forces have reportedly killed over 400 Palestinians and injured thousands more in aid distribution centres in Gaza. Over the weekend, dozens more Palestinians were killed while trying to access humanitarian aid. Why is the government still permitting the transfer of F-35 components to Israel through the international pool, knowing these aircraft may be used in operation causing mass civilian casualties?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've set out the reasons why the government has had to make special measures in order to ensure that the F-35 programme continued to operate, including our continued role in the global supply, the global spares pool, which is in the United States. But I agree with the sentiments of the Honourable Lady's constituent. Clearly, the deaths around aid distribution centres are horrifying, and there needs to be a full investigation, action taken. But vitally, aid must get into Gaza at the scale required from enough distribution centres in order to try and avoid the horrifying scenes that so many have seen.
Chair of the Select Committee, Emily Thornley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We must not forget Gaza, despite the fact that the eyes of the world are now turned to the Iran-Israel war. It's very important that we continue to remember the suffering of the Gazans and we continue to move on it. As a witness to my committee said, there is lethal chaos in Gaza, a witness from MSF. But there is one read across, I think, from the Iran-Israel war, which I think we should learn from, which is the clear closeness between Israel and America and the fact that America can influence Israel. Yes. In our conversation,
that was Emily Thornley speaking there in the House of Commons. Answering questions was Hamish Faulkner, the Foreign Office Minister, mainly about the situation in Gaza. We're just getting some lines, it must be said, in from the Reuters news agency in relation to President Trump reacting to events this morning between Israel and Iran. And it sounds like Donald Trump, who we think has just woken up and is making his way to Maryland to take off on Air Force One to head to the NATO summit in Europe, is not very happy with both Israel and Iran today. He says that he didn't like that Israel unloaded right after they agreed to a ceasefire. That's term unloaded is a quote, we believe, and also is saying that both Israel and Iran violated the ceasefire. So those two lines coming in from Reuters, a news agency. He's also saying that Iran will never rebuild its nuclear program, and also saying that its nuclear capabilities are gone. So we've got President Trump making his way to the Joint Base Andrews, where he's going to fly to the NATO summit in the Netherlands, but reacting to suggestions of violations of ceasefires this morning, arguing that both Israel and Iran, he believes, violated the ceasefire. He is not happy with Israel. In fact, the line that has literally just dropped from Reuters, saying that President Trump is not happy with Israel, but also saying that Iran's nuclear capabilities are gone. We're getting more lines. He's not happy with Iran either, but he's really unhappy with Israel. So clearly Donald Trump has woken up this morning, has saw what has happened with suggestions that missiles have been fired from Iran, but also that Israel were likely to retaliate. And we're just hearing that President Trump has said he is not happy with Israel, he's not happy with Iran, but he is really unhappy with Israel. And we will bring you more on that as we get it here on Sky News. And of course, we'll keep across those pictures live from Maryland. As I said, we're expecting President Trump to depart for the NATO summit in the next hour or so. Let's return back to the business news if we can now, because another blow for low-income households this morning as grocery price inflation hits its highest level since last February. According to the market researcher Cantor, it was driven by price rises in products such as butter, meat and chocolate. Well, according to Cantor, grocery price inflation rose to 4.7% for the 4 weeks to the 15th of June. That's up from 4.1% the month before. Well, let's speak to Fraser McKevitt, Head of Retail and Consumer Insight at Cantor. Very good morning to you, Fraser. And this is not good news for any of us.
No, it's not, because the average household in Britain is spending more than £5,000 on groceries each year. So even a small level of price inflation hits all of us in the wallet. But unlike the global energy prices, we've just been hearing some news about, fortunately, some good news there with the oil price coming down slightly. Unlike that, people do have a little bit of control over what they spend in the supermarkets, and they can make some efforts to not spend perhaps quite as much as they might be forced to otherwise.
And what is driving this? Because, yes, it's been driven from what I can see by some increases in commodity prices. But is this fair to say that this is some supermarkets passing on their higher bills, particularly when it comes to wages and tax?
Well, the supermarkets tell us that they do have a lot of extra costs going into their business in the last year. What is very clear is this market is very competitive, and any retailer in recent years that stepped out of line and allowed themselves to get a little bit more expensive than their rivals has been hit really hard in market share terms. So because of that competitiveness, I think the retailers are continuing to push quite hard on price. And that is evidenced by the fact that the levels of promotion, so the amount of money that we spend through the tills that is on any kind of deal, has gone up to 28.8%, which is nearly 18 months now of rising promotional levels.
And who's gaining from this? As I say, it's not consumers, but we do know who's gaining, and they've been gaining quite a lot in recent years, and it is the discounters, if you like, particularly the German ones.
Yeah, well, the German discounters Lidl and Aldi continue to take market share. Lidl's growth is over 10% in the latest 12 weeks, but they're not alone in doing well. So Ocado, a very small retailer, less than 2% market share, but are still doing pretty well. And they're encouraging their existing customers to come back more often. And then they're not a supermarket, but they do sell a lot of groceries. Marks and Spencer's are having a really good time as well, obviously offering something much more at the premium end of the market, perhaps more alongside the ready meals and the convenience foods.
Yeah, and doing that well, of course, Asda and Morrison's. Let's just end, though, Fraser, on how this is changing consumer habits, because I'm reading that people are now doing smaller shops, but more frequently.
Yes, very interestingly, in the latest month, we saw the highest number of trips, or footfall as they call it in the industry, since 2020. So people are wanting to get out there and go shopping. And I'm imagining that the good weather really helped that. When it's hot and sunny, when people want to have a barbecue, they often stay closer to home and go to their local convenience store rather than going to a supermarket. But the flip side of that, there were more trips, but the average size of those trips came down slightly. And indeed, overall volumes were down year on year for the first time we've seen in 2025. So there is some good news, but it's not all rosy.
Fascinating stuff. Fraser, really appreciate your time this morning from Cantor. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. OK, let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the business news on this Tuesday morning. And Amazon is to invest £40 billion in the UK over the next 3 years. The online shopping giant says it'll be creating thousands of jobs and opening 4 new warehouses. 2 of them are expected to be built in the East Midlands and 2 others in Hull and Northampton. And you can get more on grocery prices and indeed on Amazon's expansion, and also latest on Glastonbury tickets by going on the Sky News Money blog. All you need to do is scan the QR code on your screen right now, and that will take you to the Sky News app. Now, the UK is set to lose a record number of millionaires this year, according to new research. The latest Henley Private Wealth Migration Report predicts that 16,500 millionaires will relocate from the UK this year, 2025, more than any other country. It says it's due to a combination of a stagnant UK economy and the Labour government's sweeping tax reforms. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, world leaders are gathering for that NATO summit in the Netherlands. We're going to be talking about defence spending. Top of their agenda, we're going to be talking about that too. Stay tuned.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Slightly minutes, slightly better.
Very welcome back to Sky News. These are live pictures from Maryland, and that is Marine One. We believe the US President Donald Trump is on board. He is making his way to Air Force One, where he's going to travel to the Netherlands for that NATO summit. And we're getting more news in from President Trump. You may remember just before the break I was saying that he was expressing via the Reuters news agency that he was not happy with Iran and not at all happy with Israel over suggestions that both have violated the ceasefire. Well, in the last couple of minutes, President Trump also saying, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. I think this is in response to the suggestion that Israel were likely to retaliate with a further attack on Iran. President Trump very much emphasising does not want Israel to do that. He is saying if you do it, it is a major violation. Bring your pilot home now. So quite extraordinary in some ways that President Trump seems to be talking via the media effectively, trying to message Israel, telling them not to retaliate against Iran this morning. As he makes his way, as you can see, there's Marine One there beyond those trees and the decoy helicopter that always travels with the president, as they say, making his way to Joint Base Andrews, where he is going to fly to the NATO summit. And delighted to say we can speak to Annika Gupta, who is the Director of Macroeconomic Research at Wisdom Tree. A very good morning to you. Obviously covering this NATO summit, some are suggesting that this may be the most important one since the end of the Cold War.
Absolutely. We have a consensus in principle for NATO member states, 32 NATO member states, to, in principle, agree with the very ambitious new 5% NATO guideline, of which 3.5% will be allocated towards core defense spending, and the remainder 1.5% will be allocated towards cybersecurity, infrastructure, and other related items towards defense. So it is a very ambitious target, and it is very much predicated on the fact that Trump wants Europe to spend more on securing its own borders, and Europe is responding to that and claiming authority over protecting its own borders.
And what's fascinating here, of course, is that, in recent years there's been a real tussle with certain European countries to try and get them to commit that. And through, it must be said, American pressure, clearly, but also the evolving situation in Ukraine, that most of them seem to have signed up to it.
Absolutely. The rising geopolitical threats are now incentivizing Europe to spend more. We've seen quite a change of stance. Back in January, Trump was claiming to bring about a ceasefire between the Russia-Ukraine war. And, just in May of 2025, he actually has claimed that, it's not my war, it is your war. And the ball is back into Europe, Russia, and Ukraine's courts. And I think Europe is beginning to understand that. We're seeing European member states not just make short-term reactionary purchases, but they're really redefining their defense strategies for the long term. And Europe wants to gain that authority over protecting its own borders, and that's coming through in the commitments. I think the other threat is clearly proximity to the Russia-Ukraine border. We are seeing that bifurcation take place up until now, where member states closer to the Russia-Ukraine border are spending a lot more on their overall spending on defense as a percentage of GDP. But that's likely to change now that we have an expected new NATO guideline, which is very ambitious at 5%.
OK, and just to say that we are expecting to hear from President Trump in the next couple of minutes, who's been speaking to the media. We've obviously been bringing you those news lines telling Israel not to drop those bombs, saying he's not very happy that both Israel and Iran, in his view, have violated the agreement that had temporarily been in place. And we will keep across those live pictures from Maryland, Marine One landing there, President Trump due to board Air Force One in the next couple of minutes. But just on the NATO summit itself, there still is a gap, isn't there, Annika, between the commitment to spend money and potentially Europe's ability to actually spend that money, in the sense of being able to ramp up its defence manufacturing.
We are seeing a lot of change take place on the ground. This time around, we are starting to see European defense sectors actually leverage off Europe's greatest strength, which is its industrial expertise. We're seeing companies on the ground, on the defense space, collaborate with companies in Europe on the industrial space and really begin to widen those production lines, speed up capacity on ground here in Europe. And that is because there is a policy framework in place that was outlined in 2024 that is now redirecting and incentivizing European member states to purchase more equipment and more arms and ammunition from the local defense contractors. So this time around, there is an incentive, there is an urgency to act, and there is political will and frameworks in place that are really pushing European member states.
Annika, we're just going to stop you there, unfortunately, because we can now hear from President Trump. Let's have a listen into what he has to say. Well, apparently, so we can't just hear him at the moment, but we are expecting him to talk about his reaction to those suggestions that both Israel and Iran have potentially violated those essentially temporary ceasefire. We think he's about to actually depart from Marine One in Maryland. As I say, he is not very happy this morning. He's clearly woken up to news of suggestions that both Israel and Iran have fired missiles this morning. he thinks in violation of that deal. As you can say, he's been telling Israel to bring your pilots home now. The suggestion, of course, that Israel wanted to effectively retaliate against Iran this morning. President Trump has also travelled to the NATO summit. But let's listen into what President Trump has had to say to reporters this morning in reaction to what we've seen in the last couple of hours.
I don't think so, but I'm not happy that Israel's going out now. There was one rocket that I guess was fired overboard. It was after the time limit, and it missed its target. And now Israel's going out. These guys got to calm down. Ridiculous. I didn't like plenty of things I saw yesterday. I didn't like the fact that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. They didn't have to unload. And I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong. But in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot. And now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you. And I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either. All I do is play both sides. I'm going now, as you know, to NATO. Some of you are going with me, and I think it's going to be successful. We'll see. I'll let you know.
Are you going to see the agreement? It's a new dawn in the Middle East. Thanks to the agreement you managed to achieve. What are your future plans for the region, for Saudi Arabia, Israel, Gaza, the hostages?
Look, you're asking me about women in the Middle East. It's getting a lot better. Things are happening at a high level. As you know, Saudi Arabia's done a really good job. It's coming out far faster than I thought. So we're very happy about what's happening with women in the Middle East.
No, I'm talking about a new dawn in the Middle East that you managed to achieve last night.
Yeah.
The region is going to a new place with this agreement. Can you tell us what's your future plans for Gaza, for the hostages?
It's a new dawn. I appreciate the question. You're very nice. Who are you?
Thank you. I'm Neria Kraus from Israeli Channel 13 News.
Well, we have to have Israel calm down because they went on a mission this morning. I got to get Israel to calm down now.
Did you get to speak with the Prime Minister? Did you talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu last night?
I speak to everybody.
You urge both sides not to violate the ceasefire, but reports coming from the region suggest that the sides accuse each other for violating the ceasefire. So
I think they both violated it. I don't think I'm not sure they did it intentionally. They couldn't rein people back. I don't like the fact that Israel went out this morning at all, and I'm going to see if I can stop it. So as soon as I get away from you, I'm going to see if I can stop it, okay?
Have you spoken to him this morning? How confident are you
I think it's been completely demolished. I think the reason we're here is because those pilots, those B-2 pilots, did an unbelievable job. And you know, the fake news, like CNN in particular, they're trying to say, well, I agree that it was destroyed, but maybe not that destroyed. You know what they're doing? They're really hurting great pilots that put their lives in the line. CNN is scum, and so is MSDNC. They're all, and frankly, the networks aren't much better. It's all fake news, but they should not have done that. Those pilots hit their targets. Those targets were obliterated, and the pilots should be given credit. They're not after the pilots, they're after me. They want to try and demean.
You don't believe that Iran can rebuild its nuclear program?
No, Iran will never rebuild its nuclear. From there? Absolutely not. That place is under rock. That place is demolished. The B-2 pilots did their job. They did it better than anybody could even imagine. They hit late in the evening. It was dark with no moon, and they hit that target with every one of those things, and that place is gone. But when I see CNN all night long, they're trying to say, well, maybe it wasn't really as demolished as we thought. It was demolished. You take a look at the pinpricks, and you see that place is gone. And I will say, I think CNN ought to apologize to the pilots of the B-2s. I think that MSDNC ought to apologize. I think these guys really, these networks and these cable networks are real losers. You really are. You're real losers. You're gutless losers. I say that to CNN because I watch it. I have no choice. I got to watch that garbage. It's all garbage. It's all fake news. But I think CNN is a gutless group of people. And the people that run it, nobody even knows it's been sold so many times. but the people that run it ought to be ashamed. MSDNC, a guy named Brian Roberts, he heads it. He's a disgrace. He's a weak, pathetic disgrace.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Yeah, we'll just apologise for that language from the US President Donald Trump, who was speaking to reporters before leaving for that NATO summit and departing on Air Force One. So just to bring you up to date with the latest lines from the US President then, he's accused both Iran and Israel of violating a ceasefire that dropped the last few minutes, and he's saying he helped broker that ceasefire, which began just a few hours ago. Meanwhile, strikes continued on both sides in the hours leading up to it, really, including in Beersheba in southern Israel. We know at least 5 people were killed there. These are live pictures of Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Air Force One will depart, heading for the Netherlands. We also heard from the Iranian state media also denying that it violated ceasefire details. We're going to go live now, fast-moving afternoon, go live to Jerusalem. And our correspondent, Tom Cheshire, will do that in a moment. But the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, arriving in The Hague with that big commitment from the Prime Minister to spend 5% of GDP on defence by 2035. He also met with Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday too, firming up that relationship once again with Ukraine. Well, we can bring Tom Cheshire in live from Jerusalem now. And Tom, quite remarkable the lines that we've heard from the President of the United States, that he was really not happy with either side, but especially Israel.
Yeah, he was clearly furious, and there's one big reason for that is that this is his deal he's presented to the world. All the way through last night, he was making the world aware of it through his social media posts, a very unique way to announce a ceasefire. Sometimes it was confusing, we weren't quite sure what was happening. But he's angry with both parties, but in 2 different ways, I think. First of all, there is this, again on social media, posting to Israel to call back its jets, to not drop bombs on Iran. Now, again, there has been confusion here. There was, a wave of ballistic missiles up until the ceasefire deadline. But after that, Israel said they had seen 2 missiles fired. Neither of those caused any damage, but they promised to retaliate. We don't know what that retaliation looks like. Actually, Donald Trump's statement that the jets needs to come home, that's sort of the best intel we've had so far, that jets are in the air, that they're intending to strike Tehran, as the defense minister of Israel said. The other thing that Donald Trump said that he sounded annoyed about too, and as he says, he sounded more annoyed with Israel than with Iran, is this idea that after the ceasefire was announced, but before it had taken effect, Israel was hitting Tehran hard. And we know that's the case because they put out a statement today, the Israeli government, saying over the last 24 hours they'd killed hundreds of operatives, they said, as well as another nuclear scientist working on Iran's nuclear weapons program. That was all before the ceasefire, and that is how Israel and many other countries have conducted themselves. We've seen that in the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That ceasefire was announced. It wasn't brokered by President Trump, of course, but when that was announced, Israel kept hitting Beirut right up until the moment. So the ceasefire was about to happen, but they kept going. So perhaps that's what they thought was the case in this go. Iran clearly thought the same because they were firing ballistic missiles right up into the deadline. But that has really irked President Trump in a really, really big way. And I think perhaps his upset with Israel is that he's seen him himself is coming to Israel's aid. He's delivered those B-2 bombers, that really daring, surprising assault on Iran's Fordo nuclear site. That's what he thinks he's done for Israel, and also delivered a ceasefire. So for that to be in jeopardy, well, you just saw how furious he was coming off that plane. Whether that has an effect, whether those planes do come back, whether those bombs are not dropped, we simply do not know yet. It's been a confusing, fast-moving day. A ceasefire still apparently exists. It may be tenuous, but I think Donald Trump is going to be watching that closely. This is a really firm, clear message, especially to the Israeli side.
Interesting, is it? One of his other messages was, do not drop the bombs. If you do, it's a major violation. Tom, thank you so much for now. Well, earlier, Sky's Cordelia Lynch visited a site of a missile strike in southern Israeli city of Beersheba, where an apartment block was hit by an Iranian missile, and she sent us this.
The damage is extensive. You can see behind me, this is a 7-storey building, totally destroyed. They've been clearing the rubble over the past few hours. It struck at around 6 o'clock this morning. 3 people in the same apartment, as we understand, were killed. Another person towards the entrance of the building. You can see some of these cars as well, completely covered in dust and debris. We have seen here just how fragile, how perilous this moment is. Now, we have heard from Israel. They are accusing Iran of a serious violation of the ceasefire. Now, this strike occurred before that ceasefire was brought into place at 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, the Israelis are accusing the Iranians of them firing a missile after the ceasefire and into northern Israel, about 2 hours from here. Now, there's some suggestion that they are trying to conflate what occurred here with that strike in the north. Iran deny any violation of the ceasefire. We've heard from state media there that there was no missile fired